welcome back to another episode of VCTV. I am joined today by some outstanding friends and guests from around the world who are here to talk to you about what is the latest in different technologies, trends, industries, and regions around the world. And today, in particular, we're going to be talking about remote and work technologies. Now, these do not just impact one industry, but they actually impact a lot of industries as more and more industries have gone into this remote type working that we've been in for the past 6 to 9+ months. It is something that we've been seeing as a continuing trend. And it's not just working from home, it's actually the idea of something much bigger. We talked last week about augmented reality and virtual reality, the idea of telepresence, the idea of connecting in new forms and new ways. This plays a role in our future of work and remote technology. It's not just all about Zoom, even though that's where we're coming from today, but we've got much more to unpack, and we've got a whole week of great episodes, including a double feature today, all here on VCTV. So get ready. With that, you, our audience, a big thank you for joining us today on VCTV. As we love to do, we love to thank you, but also let you know that at any time, if you as investors want to be on a show like today or any edition of VCTV, please do reach out. We'd love to have you on to share your thoughts and your insights on what you're seeing, either at a macro, micro, or just your thoughts in general on a specific topic and industry as they are shifting and shaping around the world. Entrepreneurs, don't feel left out. There is definitely room for you. If you would like to come on VCTV and have the chance to pitch us, this family bunch right here, if you'd like the chance to pitch us one-on-one and have the chance to pitch to our entire audience, we'd love to have you. Just feel free to reach out to myself, Elena, or to the entire LA Token team, and we'll make sure to get you on board. With that, a big thank you to Elena and to the entire LA Token team for making VCTV possible on any screen, on any device, wherever you may be in the world. With that being said, let's get started and welcome our guests. Again, there's a lot to talk about in these topics today, and I think it's going to be a shifting conversation from what we've heard in the past and what we're seeing in the general news today, because more of these technologies we have been talking about here on VCTV, all the way from the deep technology, the infrastructure layer, all the way through to the consumer. All of those are playing a role now in how we work, how we learn, whether that be remote, physical, or digital, or whether that be in new locations as well. So let's dive in. With that being said, I want to welcome our first guest, an old friend, comes all the way from the other side of the pond. I'm going to start from a different direction on my screen today. Alexis, welcome back to the show. A little introduction, a little background on yourself.
Thank you. Thank you. So Alexis Goba, I'm a Franco-American investor and serial entrepreneur. I've been creating 2 startups in the field of remote digital learning. So I've been using those digital tools a lot in the corporate and academia world. So my pitch would be today to see what I've seen in Europe, London, Paris, and Moscow in terms of changes of corporate education, mainly in big companies in France, UK, and Russia.
Wonderful, Alexis. Excited to hear all about that today. And I know you've already texted me a few things that you want to drop as well. And one thing, actually, to your point, one thing we haven't talked much about around this topic is voice and video. So how are we now interacting with each other, right? We've commonly used most Slack or a few other tools to connect with each other. But what happens when voice starts to enter the picture? We'll come back to that. Tarun, welcome back to the show. It's been a few days since I've had the pleasure to see you. Lena and I welcome you back, but if you can, a little introduction and a little background.
Thanks, Kyle, again for inviting me, and hello, everyone. So my name is Tarun Zakani. For those of you who didn't catch me last time, I'm the founder and CTO of Abundant, which is a big data analytics and digital transformation company. We also do edutech or edtech on the side. So I myself, I'm an educator, trainer, not exclusively, of course, by background. I've done other things as well. But since we're talking about remote tech, work tech today, that's especially relevant to what we do at our company, because we do software development, both internal and external projects. So definitely we've been kind of upskilling, reskilling, cross-skilling, every kind of skilling you could imagine, in the past few months.
Up, down, left, right, here we are, continuing forward. Henry, good friend, welcome back to the show. A little intro, a little background.
Thanks for having me, Kyle, and Elena, thanks for inviting me back. So Henry, I'm here, for me, it's kind of simple. For the most part, my entire career, I'm a finance guy. Always have an emerging technology bent. So I have two hats currently. One is I have an advisory firm that I do interim CFO work with startups and small, medium-sized businesses. The second hat is I'm a venture partner for a venture fund, always look for early stage companies to invest. Verticals I typically cover are fintech, blockchain, consumer, AI, ML, and IoT. And also always have a bucket of others. The others, basically the others bucket have a criteria. The criteria are something that I can understand, my little head that I can wrap my hand around it. And then the second thing is it's got to have a great market potential. Thanks again for having me. Look forward to share a few thoughts here. Thanks, Kyle.
Absolutely. David, another fellow Bay Area member. Welcome back to the show. Pleasure to see you. If you can, a little intro and a little background.
Hi, Cal. Great to be back. So my name is David Cao. I'm running two organizations. Number one is I-50. I-50 Ventures. We invested in over 30 companies last few years. And right now, health tech is the number one sector. Ag food is also a big sector we are looking into. At the same time, the remote tech is definitely on my radar. We've been looking for all sorts of solutions for disrupting the new ways people engage with each other in the business environment because of the pandemic. So the second hat I'm wearing is I'm organizer of Silicon Valley Entrepreneurs, which is the largest entrepreneur community in entire West Coast. And we run lots of SV Talk, SV Demo, all sorts of community events every month.
Wonderful. And I love how you put it, the way people are interacting with each other, right? That's a very, very key point to today's discussion. As we mentioned pre-show and a little bit as we go. And Noble, I'm saving that one for you. Alina, welcome back to the show. I gave you permission to show one slide, which we'll get to later. But first, a little introduction, a little background on yourself.
Hi, this is Mihaela Olieru speaking. My background is as an academic, gone entrepreneur because of circumstances. But my research was, as an academic, was in e-society, experimenting with the technologies which we are going to talk about today in my labs, and with a mindset, visionary mindset of what we could do with them. Well, now we are there where we can do a lot with them, and they are helping us. So I created the Impact Institute for the Digital Economy to continue these explorations in the real world. And I am working with several startups, as well as investors and governments, to put such technologies into practice. I look forward to share a few of them in images as well, when Kyle will allow me. Thank you.
You asked nicely. I will allow it. You prepped me as I prep. So thank you very much. We'll get to that here shortly. And Noble, last but not least, my man, this is your topic. We're talking about remote technology everywhere. This is what we talk about almost every day here on VC TV. But for the few people out there who don't know you, a little intro, a little background.
Hi, my name is Noble Dracone. I'm the founder of Dracone Capital Partners. I've been in the investment space going on almost 27 years now, just among multiple verticals. I started off as an entrepreneur when there was the conversion from paging into cellular systems, when we were selling all the bandwidth back in 2000 and end of 1999. And fast forward, you know, I'm wearing two big hats, right? I've got our company, Dracone Capital Partners, where we go out and help companies raise capital, as well as I'm an advisor for maccelerator.la, in which we created for the last 3 years a huge ecosystem of participants around the world. You know, we're kind of an accelerator incubator, and we evolved or added a whole entire venture fund to that. The space really interests me because it's kind of the reason why I got back involved anyway with being an entrepreneur and being in this this arena. I filed a patent on augmented reality, utilizing interactivity between clothing and physical items for gaming, and it's evolved. And I've seen where the technology, particularly now, may have its time to shine. To be frank, people in the way they're interacting has become great to see people in 2D, but as we know, the flat screens that we're having in Web 2.0 are starting to slowly evolve away from things like Oculus and HoloLens. So, you know, this is kind of I think the next phase of Web 3.0, and I'm happy to be here, Kyle. Thanks a lot for having me.
Absolutely. And I mean, you bring up all of you do bring up so many good points as to what this encompasses, because as we talked a little bit of pre-show, you know, this topic is high on everyone's mind in terms of conversation. You know, will work from home be our future? It is our future. Remote work is our future. And I think a lot of individuals kind of get that confused as to what that can actually mean. It doesn't just mean working from home. It actually can mean so much more, as each of you have touched on, from, you know, not just how we collaborate and communicate with each other, but also how we connect with each other, how we learn, how we engage, how we interact with not just each other, but also the products and services or the devices or the technology that we may be engaged with as well. So there's a lot to talk about in here. And I want to start off very openly to each of you and get your thoughts and ideas of what is the current state, what is currently happening. You know, again, we talked a lot, Henry, we talked pre-show, we've talked a lot over the past few months of what's happened, called in the last year, around remote tech and WorkTech. And as we come into this new Web 3.0 that we're accelerated into, and things are more digitized, we are more screen oriented, or living our digital life 24/7, truly, as we talked about last week on VCTV. What does this all look like going forward? You know, where are we today, and how is that pushing us forward into these new ways of communicating, these new ways of working together? Because I don't know about you, audience, but I know for me, aside from joining my friends every day here on VCTV, I am working 100% in this new remote fashion with new tools and new software, and finding new ones every day. So guys, let's dive in. Would love to hear from each of you your kind of thoughts on where current things are. Tarun, I'm going to start with you, and then we'll come around. And Mahila, if you have a slide, make sure you have it up and ready. So we'll come to you last, so you can bring that up. Tarun, go ahead.
Well, I mean, actually, my background is in software development. So, you know, we're used to working with remote tools anyway. So, you know, like Jira and Slack and Discord, and I guess the list goes on. But, you know, in my company, for example, we had already, you know, everyone was already working remotely by March, the beginning of March. There was a lockdown announced in Malaysia on March 18th. So we were actually working remotely completely already, you know, 2 weeks prior to that, right? So we were already using, you know, Google Meet and G Suite and all this other stuff for years. So we've already set up kind of like a system, you know, where obviously all the work related projects and project work was handled on Slack. Jira is where we did project management. Confluence was our wiki, right? So we would update, you know, any kind of documentation we needed there. And then, you know, for our APIs and everything, we had Swagger. And so like everything was already, you know, remote. And we've been doing this for years, right? So it wasn't much of a change. It's just that people would show up at the office for just camaraderie, you know. That was like the only reason to show up, right? Because they could do all their work remotely anyway. And so I think that, and yeah, and the coffee, of course, right? I mean, I missed, yeah, it's because I used to get my chai latte from Coffee Bean, actually. And so the only reason I came to the office was for that reason, actually, to be honest. But you know, the camaraderie, of course. But the reality is that, you know, if you're in software development in particular, I think you've already, you know, gotten used to working remotely, you know, even if your colleagues are in the same, you know, city or town, right? It doesn't have to be distributed teams. I mean, we were already doing that. So, and I think a lot of companies were already doing that. I think what's changed is, you know, meetings, right? So what I've noticed is obviously it's far more difficult for me, especially given where I am, right? So what I mean by that is having face-to-face meetings and being able to discuss and have that nonverbal cues is quite important in a lot of the work that we do. And then being disconnected from that, it means that I have to spend a lot more time, explaining things and showing things on Zoom or Google Meet or whatever. So there's a lot of wasted time that I've noticed, that has occurred. But yeah, I mean, that's really the main gripe I would have.
I've heard in some studies they've said we've added an extra 48 minutes, very odd number. Let's just call it an hour. We've added an extra hour with this remote work that so many are doing at one time. But again, this is just a blip, I would argue, into the bigger picture that is what remote tech and remote work can bring to us as well. But nonetheless, I mean, yeah, there's a little bit of fatigue, there's a little bit of time wasted, there's also a lot more time as well. Alexis, to you, kind of what are you seeing further on Tarun's point as the current state of things around these technologies?
Yeah, so the last 3 years, I've been involved with a company I founded with my co-founder Claire in France, doing customer experience and employee engagement. And the interesting story for the last 6 months is this company is based in Paris, London, and Moscow, and we're working for big companies, changing their way of working and the way they engage their clients and the way they engage their employees. And we've seen 3 categories of companies. We've seen big companies totally changing the way they work and not being ready to do it, and really struggling the last 3-4 months to go digital. And we've seen that in France, mainly, where we're very involved with the CAC 40 companies, the top 40 French companies. Even if they were very international, this change of working, not having the coffee, the time to speak with colleagues and clients, and most probably the French way of doing business, was very complicated for very big companies in France. So we have been trying to accelerate that with a certain number of tools. Obviously, the Microsoft 365 tool, the Slack, etc. We integrated that in the way they were working. But we have also identified a number of startups which have been launching interesting tools for corporates, like one in France called Klaxoon, to engage, basically groups in trainings and in corporate trainings to make sure that they are involved in what's happening. So that's one type of companies we've been working with, and it has been an interesting journey. The other one is obviously the startup field where I am, where I, every year I create a startup or finance few startups. And we see those guys, a bit like Tarun said, using those tools already for a long time and working remote before the big guys already. So I think they were better prepared for this. And we have a lot of people in the middle, either employees or customers who are half digital, half not digital, and who are struggling right now. And the fatigue subject, the psychological effect of not meeting, I think is starting to kick in, and especially if we're going into a second wave of COVID, which is most probably what's going to happen by the end of the year in the US, in Europe, in Asia, until the vaccine is done. So I think it's not a sprint, it's a marathon what's happening. And I think we need to prepare our customers and employees to use those tools calmly, slowly, because I think it's going to be a long journey and the fatigue effect will be there.
Well, and you bring up a good point around the fatigue. I mean, look, I think all of us can say we've worked remotely for some time on this call, and our audience can sympathize with that, especially the entrepreneurs. But fatigue comes in many different ways. When you stare at a computer screen and into a camera for 12 hours a day because you're on back-to-back meetings versus that interaction physically, that's one level of fatigue, right? And building those constraints is very important. But with technologies, it's supposed to come efficiencies. It's supposed to come optimization. And it seems like we've maybe tweaked those dials a little too much to make us that much more effective. So we're working that much longer and forgetting to build in those certain constraints from the mental capacity as well. So just a little side note, as I know a few previous guests on VCTV would definitely mention that to further your point, Alexis. So great. And I see Noble and Mahila both smiling, so I know that they're going to touch on this. Henry, to you, furthering those points of both Tarun and Alexis, what are you seeing as the current state of things around these technologies?
Absolutely. So, once again, some of these things are, been talked about for a little bit, but I'll share a couple of thoughts and I'll just digress just a little bit, things that we haven't really covered, or at least I haven't heard here. So the current environment, basically everything with other tools has been, collaboration tools has been accelerated as a result of COVID. Bear in mind that much of these tools were here already. You look at Zoom, Teams, Slack, but Zoom went up, I think the first month during the COVID, I think March was 10x than the prime month before. So once again, they were using, but certainly when more people are using it, they improved the features. Early on, one of the example was security. So these tools are being sort of improved significantly in a very short time. Now, let's talk about now, and then also let's talk about what's going to immediate term and what's going to happen in the future. I'd love to hear debates if someone sort of disagree me on this one. Meeting in person is not going away anytime soon, as far as I'm concerned. So you talked about you stare at a screen for 12 hours, no one to talk to in person. I'm not sure how many people missed that. I definitely missed that. It sounds like Kyle, you missed that also. So I see some startups talking about, actually one pitch me talking about what they call an office everywhere type of thing. What is office everywhere? It's like a WeWork type of model, except they don't own any real estate. They use as a platform to help organize, a source or place you where you want to work type of business model. I think that can look interesting. Why? Simple, because unlike WeWork, you're going to be locked into these long-term leases. But these, you don't own any type of leases. So you don't have any type of short-term, immediate or long-term obligations. You're going to take a cut of what people occupy. I can assure you that can come back. How big it will come back, we'll see, but that can come back. But the interesting thing is you're not taking much obligations. The obligations on the sort of the owner building or the people who run those places. So these platforms can look interesting. Now, I think Noble talked about AR and VR. I agree with you. One day we'll hit it. I'm just not smart enough to figure out when. Until that technology becomes super sophisticated, I cannot foresee human being not meeting people in person. People talk about we get cooped up the last few months. I think COVID might be with us for a little bit. Until then, I think we'll meet again in person. So I think some of those looked interesting, but AR, VR might be a longer term solution. It's a very interesting solution, but in the near term or intermediate to 1 to 2 to 3 years out, I think people will still like to meet in person. I'll leave it at that and I'll comment further. Thank you, Kyle.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think that that's not going away. It's just it's a moment, right? The idea of AR, VR, I think it's really exciting when we get to that telepresence spot, right? And being able to do maintenance, to interact, to build, to kind of play or mix in that 3D environment. I think it doesn't matter if you're in person or not. That's going to be an amazing tool and a powerful shift in technology when it's there. And Noble's about to tell us in a moment here that it's here. But when it's here at a mainstream level, that's when I think it's going to get exciting. I know David's going to talk a little bit about, telepresence from the health side. We had multiple spinal surgeries handled through AR and VR in the past 2 months. I mean, this is the time where these technologies start to emerge and really show their proof of a use case in ways that they haven't otherwise. So Noble, to you, Henry and I both teed you up, so we'll come to you and then David and.
No, I appreciate the sentiment. So there's a couple of this topic is so wrapped in with a lot of ideas. I don't believe that there's 100% replacement for in-person meeting. To give you a prime example, I'm a member of Club Corp. It's got over 300 locations worldwide, and their outside facilities are still open. So I've been doing my in-person meetings there. And it's sort of to what he was talking about, this whole idea of this touchdown place. And because it's a business club and a country club in different facilities, everybody that we interact in my referral base, those guys are all using that as their secondary location to go to do all their business. So, the idea and the concept is definitely 100% on point to be able to have a space where people want to meet and feel like they're at these on the go offices, because we've all been using them. Prior to that, we were using Starbucks, to be frank. Starbucks doesn't let you stay there now, but that was kind of the place that I used as my default location all throughout the 90s in the early 2000s. So, people want to meet, but I think there's going to be a cobbling together of how interaction happens that's going to run across multiple spectrums, between the screen time, between the VR, the AR, and then between these touchdown meeting places. Because frankly, the only reason, I think I've saved more money from not going to Starbucks. I used to go to Starbucks almost every day to the office in 1997, and I would get one thing. Like, there's two drinks I always got every day. It was either the hot tea in the morning, which was usually they've got a really good a combo tea that's oolong, green tea, and everything else. And then I would get a black iced tea in the afternoon. So I've saved so much money from going to Starbucks that I can continue to afford my membership at the club, right? But the state of things, I think that a lot of innovation is right now happening in VR and AR, and I guess we'll talk about more about it. But there's two companies that are on our radar: Spatial.io and Nreal. Nreal's created a hardware which is really lighter, more accessible, allows augmented reality to happen, virtual reality to happen in real time. There's people making contacts right now. And then Spatial.io has come up with an innovative software solution in which they've allowed people to utilize headsets and see the avatars or friends and coworkers in space while they're interacting, almost creating a real-time operation. So because I track the space very aggressively, I realize, and these are software applications that can be downloaded now. This is not some future off. They've had a lot of major corporations start downloading Spatial.io. And so we're tracking them for potential investment. So I think that it's part of the landscape. So I'll tell you now, it's not far off. It's just a matter of any innovation is adoption. But I think the biggest issue, I've had a software company for the last 4.5 years. I completely agree with everyone on the panel. I've been working remotely and with online tools for the last 4 years in our tech company. Prior to that, I was one of the first early adopters of Skype, and I was having back in the late 90s. So the reality is, I've been working remotely. I have remote teams. My concern has always been for those people who don't, and what that world looks like. And so my day-to-day interactions with people who are stuck, my kids are coming back to school this week, and to see how teachers are kind of stumbling over themselves and fighting with a lot of issues, because that falls still in the WorkTech. This is their work, right? To train our children. They're dealing with a lot of issues and trying to overcome hurdles in the technology. Because all the kids are signing up, we take for granted one of the most basic things: bandwidth. Our area is talking about rolling potential blackouts over the next few weeks because we've had a heat wave in Southern California, and there may not, with all these kids going back to school, at that point, does it even really matter about the tech if you can't even log in? So there's a lot of other fundamental issues, I think, that people are struggling with. And while we're quite nimble in our ability to use multiple softwares to interact and engage, one of the big issues now, particularly with our kids, is that there's almost 3 or 4 different platforms that the teachers are trying to relay information on. They're trying to give information to the parents, can contact them on one software, then they're trying to use another software to train the kids, and then they're trying to use another software to interact and then be able to play videos and relay information. It's an overwhelming amount of items. One of the smartest things that I've heard today was how Facebook is on track to start streamlining their messaging systems across all their platforms, so that the DM actually interacts with both Instagram, WhatsApp, and the like. So I think that part of this idea of this remote tech, it has to get better. I remember when we first got on board with all these software programs, when I was starting the tech company, we had Trello for one thing, we had Slack for another thing, we had people who were so diehard fans that they had to use XYZ. It was a ridiculous landscape. And I think part of this, the beauty of right now, is we're going to see a shakeout. The app that we're all using now is one Zoom, gangbusters. I've been using Zoom for years before it became popular. Next thing you know, it's exploded because it was the most stable solution of people interacting. once again,
Mhm.
Google, I personally feel, failed with the GoToMeeting, or not the GoToMeeting, but the Google Meets format. And then GoToMeeting lagged on their software development because I used GoToMeeting and I used Zoom
Mhm.
back and forth for years. So I think that we have a beautiful time to, like any time with technology, see who really is supportive of their customers. And at the end of the day, and I will say it again, Kyle, augmented reality and virtual reality is here. There's software that we can actually download and interact. And I think that that becomes part of an integral part of a trend. I don't think it's going to all of a sudden show up in 3 years. I think it's going to be built into the fabric of companies that need that global interaction to do CAD drawings, to do CAD development. Before you, when they introduced last year, their interaction where people can manipulate things in 3D space together using AR really set the tone of that high level interaction. And I think it'll trickle down to everyone else.
Absolutely, and I think that some of the things you mentioned, Henry mentioned as well, is while it's here, there's still a few hurdles to get over, right? I mean, the power consumption, the bandwidth, the things that we take for granted. To Tarun's point with me, the coffee in the office, right? It's a small thing, but we take it for granted. But now, if you are in a more remote based environment, those things like bandwidth go away. Working at a Starbucks. Alexis is shaking his head, but when you go work at a Starbucks, bandwidth is not the same. And so those are small things that we take for granted. And I think you're all right so far, as well as around these different types of solutions. Everyone has their pick of the week, and we really need to get those into a stabilized or standardized format, so they do either cross communicate, so are interoperable, as a word that Henry and I tend to use in the blockchain space now and then, or that they are compatible in some way. So the kids of the next generation don't have to use 4 tools at such a young age, when we are already using 12 on a daily basis. Henry, before I come to you, or Henry, do you have a point? I saw you on mute.
I do, yeah. So I do
Go ahead.
want to, since we got Noble on, if Noble you're tied up, feel free, we can, defer to you later on when you come back. I just want to get your thoughts on, I know AR and VR eventually, will be, mainstream adoption, like what we are with all these remote tech stuff. How far do you think we're away from that in terms of mainstream adoption, in terms of the technology, so on and so forth? Bandwidth. I think Kyle touched upon that. What are your thoughts? Or any of my panelists, I'd love to hear your thoughts on when are we going to get there? I think there's some excitement around it, but even with autonomous vehicles, I think we're not going to get there anytime soon. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about AR and VR. If any of my colleagues here have any thoughts, I'd love to hear that as well.
Be okay, Kyle? Because I
May
know
I?
we like to keep a fast clip.
Yeah, let's go Noble and then Mahila next,
No,
and then
no, I mean,
we'll pause there and we'll go to David for his thoughts as well. So go ahead.
I said I sent a couple examples of companies that we're tracking. I believe because we're in the smartphone era, we forget that smartphones have only been around a little over a decade. So immediately we make this assumption that because it's been here so long, it's always been here, and that's not quite the case. And it popped on the scene with an immediate move from, as we all saw, the original iPod that people were playing and getting music and then being taught how to use small screens. So I think that this is the same instance. People are now being taught how to wear headsets after Google had to go back on Google Glass. And now that's becoming bit by bit the move forward. I think that the question really is, how much of AR will we see? Will it all be 3D? Will it be 2D? And I think that there's an incremental move in full accessibility on 2D augmented reality, overlaying what our world looks like instantly. We have visual science and AI converging to the point of where we can look at any physical object and know where to buy it, how much it costs, the history of it. And so we're working right now on a project with the LA Zoo to do the same thing for kids to be able to visit the zoo virtually right now. And so that technology is here. It's a matter of, and it's always been, it's an innovation, and I've talked about this before, it's innovation that hasn't had the ubiquitous use case like the original smartphone, the iPod had, where it was music, and then we use music as the entree to everything else with the idea of the smartphone. In this instance, people haven't found that one particular cool use case that then makes it ubiquitous, but it doesn't change the fact that it's here. Angry Birds has a great game on Oculus, and with that whole movement of Oculus becoming smaller and more portable, we're really on the verge of it, but who knows what that looks like. That's why our company focuses on the gaming side. So yeah, I agree with you, Henry. I don't think it's the issue of the bandwidth or the technology. It's more so what's that special use case that everyone needs to make it work. And this may be the time for us to find it.
Mahila, I know you had a comment. So don't share your screen yet. You have a comment.
No,
I'm
then I
coming to
will
you.
wait. I'm okay to wait.
Okay. David, thank you, Noble. David, your thoughts on kind of the current state of thing, and then Mahila, I want to get to you. I want to make sure you have enough time to load everything up. So go ahead, David.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Cal. What we saw is that the remote tech initially was, before pandemic, was a backup solution. And the last few months, people are rushed. Let's connect. We cannot disconnect for a few months. People try to find the connections. Not most people realize that this pandemic will last for years. So this means remote tech will change the lifestyle of the workers and the working environment pretty much forever. What we saw, particularly in health tech space, there are huge impact in everywhere we engage with the patient and how the workers engage between themselves. I give you an example. It's official recommendation from almost all the hospitals that are the chronic disease. If you don't have any emergency, stay home until the hospital is not busy. The question is how long these people has heart disease, has diabetics. They are not really need to go to see the doctors immediately, but they need to see one day very soon, sooner or later. So what we saw is that this is a huge disruption of how patients engage with the doctors and the nurses for next few years. This is just a start. So this means that if the patient stay home, then how does a nurse engage with the doctors? How does the doctors talk with his peers? And how do we engage with each other? So this means that this need a new workflow and new infrastructure, new monitoring services. I'm sure many of you been to hospital. You go to hospital first, nurse will test you everything. Now, if the patient's in home, how does a nurse get all the data, and how does the data be transferred to doctors before doctors see the patients? What we saw, this is the beginning of the disruption. Actually, this is one of the biggest opportunity around in the hospital, in the healthcare space, because actually the remote service to the patients actually significantly decrease the cost for the hospitals, even for the insurers. So this means that there are less engagement, less cost, but more actually engaging with the patients. What we saw is that actually now we realize that in the past you can only test your blood pressure, a couple things, maybe every time you saw the doctor, maybe once a week or once a month or once every 3 months. Now actually you can test maybe every day, maybe a few times a day. There are lots of technology addressing these issues. Now, if you have the data, if the doctors have the data of the patient every day, few times, or even continuously, then how does the patient work with the nurse and the doctors? There are lots of different technology are being developed around this arena. That's why we saw there's big opportunities. And now the curing the process. How do you distribute the medicine? Let's say even some small surgeries there. I will not go in detail, but I will say that this is the beginning of, everything. And so it's disrupting the entire workflow of the hospital system. Now, once the patient, the challenge or opportunities, there's not if the chronic disease, the patient get familiar with the person. I'm going to stay home. I don't need to really go to the hospital, waiting for half an hour in the waiting room to see the nurses. Now, if they enjoy stay home, and the workflow will be changed forever. Now, the last thing I want to highlight is that in the past few months, the remote tech sounds like needs to solve the emergency. The next question is that can we make remote work more enjoyable? Instead, so in working environment, you create lots of little things to make sure all your employees, all your staff enjoy the work together. And not the question that, okay, if everybody's on Zoom, it's a fatigue for 10 hours looking at the data and looking at the patient on the phone, they cannot touch. Can they have something enjoyable using, I don't know, VR or something to make life easier? And can they have a joke can they have a private channel between doctor and the nurses to make life easier? This is applied to beyond the hospital. For instance, my son is taking class in the drawing. In the past, the drawing has been, you have to, the teacher look at maybe 10 students, each of the drawing, go, what are you doing, give the instructions. Now, actually the camera enable the teacher to see every student's drawing at the same time. They can create a video like every 10 seconds, or every 1 minute to see, okay, what is exactly how he creates the picture. That's actually improves the efficiency of the instruction process. We never saw it before. So I see great opportunities among the remote technologies. So that's why I'm so excited to looking for many startups around this arena. Thank you, Cal.
David, you just gave me a great idea. We kind of touched on it. Mahila, go ahead and you can bring up your screen as I'm making this point. So we touched a little bit of this last week as we talked about machine learning, but the idea of being able to do remote tech or remote work in some way and watching and monitoring as people are doing things, the data that can be collected from that and then processed and understood. There's a whole huge opportunity, whether you're in healthcare, you're in maintenance, it doesn't matter, or education. There's opportunities. I'm seeing a lot of slides. You get one, but there's a lot of opportunities. So to those that are listening, data, being able to analyze visually what's happening on someone's screen from a teacher's perspective, and then being able to get real-time feedback. Someone's $1 billion idea. Alexis is ready to invest. Don't worry. You got at least one investor on here. All right. Mahila, it's all you.
Hi, yes, thank you. And as we discussed that we want to make this a bit more fun, I think this is part of it. And I completely agree with my colleague mentioning gaming technologies. Actually, 15 years ago or more, I don't want to remember how many years ago, I co-founded the International Conference on Telework. In those times when we were thinking, tele what? So today we see those technologies which we have explored since, so far mainly in scientific journals and in labs, deployed right now. So this is Ford Motors, April this year, deploying quickly virtual reality in order to continue with the development of their cars. So as before, we were using, or they were using the holo technologies in order to collaborate in person and maybe send something to their office in another country. Now, people are staying home and they can create and co-create various bits and pieces of the cars and then test them virtually. So collaborative tools such as Miro by AutoCAD, but even more advanced, which have been used before, and we have developed them in our labs for the Department of Defense, for example. But now they are being deployed by companies. So here is a Ford Mustang being diagnosed remotely as a smart asset. And now with blockchain, artificial intelligence, and virtual reality, we can do exactly this, as my colleagues here, I'm sure, know. For this, we need a few things. Yes, identity, history. The car can even have a voice and speak. It can have rights. It is programmable and use spatial contracts. The company I was mentioning, and because I wanted to mention actually because you invited me to, is Versys. Versys.io. If you want to check them out, they are pioneers in such technologies. So here is how the home office of the individual looks like. They are at home, but virtually they can be in the office. We have deployed such technologies, as I mentioned, for emergency response and defense, where obviously they cannot be in the same place. They are in the field and then they can coordinate, but they are very useful today in virtual meetings and plannings, as we discussed. So with regard to education, because this is very critical, I always envision myself as, inside the holodeck as future work ground, looking into my roster of students and picking those who I'd like to train a bit more, or who I'd like to ask certain questions, and immersing them virtually into the molecules. So they enter and they can see what actually is happening. So VR and AR are already in the lab, and I agree that they are not deployed in education yet, but they could be, just like for motor deployed very quickly. So we can move from the current education system into an education system which is thinking based and experimental, and we can accelerate the creative economy. Mobile devices have been discussed here. So of course, if I can, and this is already available from IKEA, if I can see how the furniture I want to buy would fit in my home, it would be much better than buying it and then returning it. So such technologies also exist. This, and last but not least, because our colleague here mentioned the medical field, now we can collect samples, especially now when we want to keep our medical personnel healthy and not at risk. We can put our samples, testing samples, into the robots coming to our home, and this is now a real application where General Electric has deployed their latest robot in form of a telemedicine robot. The doctor comes and tells you, okay, take your temperature, but also give me samples from your saliva, for example, so we can see if you are infected or not. Versys.io also enables robots and drones to arrange shelves inside Costco or other warehouses. So they increase the level of automation because of the 3D technology, which now, with which now can enable the robots to coordinate without needing the human intelligence in 3D to do that inside the warehouses, as well as for example, for merchants. So I can order my pair of shoes, but I can also try now. Many of you, I'm sure, know that we can try clothes. And I think you mentioned, I'm sorry, I couldn't pronounce your name correctly, but you mentioned that for outfits and for shoes, we can try them. So touchless by automation, I think this is crucial for our survival today, and is happening. The thing which I would like yes.
Okay, so last point, because we're coming up to the lightning round, so we're coming up to time. So
it's okay.
We're a little more than one slide, so go ahead.
That's my only intervention today, so
okay.
That's okay. So
all right, no,
thank you.
This is perfect. I mean, guys,
thank you for
so
allowing me to
here.
speak a bit. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, more than one slide, but I'll end a slide today because it's Monday. No stress. But we've talked about so many different pieces and puzzle, or the puzzle that this all makes up. And I would love to get, as we come to lightning round, where are the opportunities here? There's a lot of investors that are looking at investing in this space and trying to figure out where to place the bets long term, not for today, not for yesterday, but long term, right? That's what we do as investors, placing those bets as well. And from an entrepreneurial standpoint, where can I start building, or where should I start shifting my business to if I am building in this space as well? And to the audience, if Mihaela will let me, I will do my best to share those slides as well, because I know she didn't get a chance to finish, so I do apologize. But we'll make sure we share those out along with some of the company names. So
I apologize because I presented more than one slide, so it's okay.
That's all right.
We're good.
It's all right. Again, it's Monday. On a Tuesday, no way. On a Monday, I'll let it slide. But to each of you, opportunities. Where can people start looking and investing? And again, we're at the lightning round, so we're coming up to close. So if you can, Tarun, quickly, where are you seeing areas of opportunity start to pop up that people should be focusing on, either from that investment side or the building side?
Well, actually, mine is a silly example, but actually, I was shopping like for pancake, flour. I couldn't find it, and I actually noticed that Google Maps is doing now interiors, right? So you can actually look at the entire store, right? Like aisle by aisle, right? So I thought that of course you could have directions, right? So it'd be like basically your wife would tell me go to aisle 5, and then I could actually follow the arrows and things like that, because husbands are horrible at finding, So I thought that was a very interesting kind of application that of remote tech, essentially that you can map out you can map out a vacation, you can map out, your grocery store kind of visit, and it can actually use AI to actually optimize it. So it's, because sometimes I have to go somewhere and I have to round back and come back, right? Because I forgot something. So I thought that was actually a pretty good idea, that, if it could actually optimize your trip, so for interior kind of spaces, because if it's going to be remote, might as well try to get in and get out, right, as quickly as possible if you want to avoid, whatever, COVID or whatever may be the case.
Mhm.
So that's where
Yeah,
I see really a lot of attention going into is being able to use AI and ML with AR, VR to actually map interior spaces and give directions and things like that in a more optimized way.
That's a great point, and I think Alexis, you might have a little bit more to add to that. I mean, we're talking on the 3D mapping, but what else could be there as opportunity?
Now, for me, the opportunities are really with the big companies which are going into HR tech and making all those software speak together. There is a major subject out there with big companies having too many software, and they need to come up to a platform for basically all those software to speak together. So I'm working on 2 big companies right now doing that at the moment and putting a lot of money in them.
I like it. Maybe you'll tease 1 or 2 of those out in the after show. Nahila, super quick, 1 or 2 opportunities that people should be paying attention to.
Well, an immediate one is about payments. But for me, because I'm a high tech and I didn't get a chance to speak about that, is the drones. Definitely, drone delivery is also the robot nurses, about which I spoke in another show of yours, where, they don't get infected 24/7. They are there and they can calculate your treatment, personalized treatment. So these are my personal loves, but of course, when will we have them? They're both still in experimentations. The drones have been accelerated a bit during this time.
I absolutely agree. We've talked a little bit about that in the past. Noble, to you, where do you see opportunity?
Picks and shovels. I mean, the reality is we've got, like I mentioned earlier, bandwidth issues. We have multiple levels where blockchain is becoming key, which Mihaela brought it up, the payment issue, as well as the tracking of those payments, and then focusing on infrastructure plays. At the end of the day, the rest of it doesn't work if you're not investing in the substrate of it. And so now that we're in any more bigger server farms, everything's headed in that direction. And so the focus 100% is literally the substrate if you plan on being a long-term investor in the space. There's going to be individual hits that are going to be highly successful, but they're all going to be piggybacked on everything else, geolocation, satellites. So there's not, they don't operate in a vacuum. So if you're looking for a long-term play, the reality is this is the new utility. And so we have to focus on the utility aspect of it.
Absolutely. Henry.
Sure. So instead of commenting on specific areas, I think I would like to ask people to think about certain things. I think that'll be more helpful to build your own thesis than sort of me imposing ideas on you. So I would ask the audience to think about, during COVID, in the short, medium, and long term, or even post-COVID, what are things are likely to happen? Let me give you by way of example. So I recently did a survey with people in my network and said, how many people, this is the question that I phrased, how many people think that, post-COVID, there'll be less permanent office space usage? Well over 90% of the people said they expect less permanent office space usage. The key is permanent office space, not just a meeting place. So if that's come true, you got to think about, is commercial real estate is your thing to invest in, right? So, and then think about, post-COVID, is traveling going to be like pre-COVID, or it's going to be significantly less? Warren Buffett sold most of his airline stocks shortly after all the flights were grounded. I think number one is he just doesn't know what's going to look like. I think he even said that. In the short term, it's really, really bad. In the long term, he doesn't, intermediate term, probably the short term, he doesn't even know. So he sold it. In education, I think there are campuses talking about going on campus. I think it's because of monetary reason, not really for any reason other than monetary. What does higher education looks like? If it's going to come back, it's meeting in person. Classes will be more important than doing things online. Are we doing things permanently online? Or is it going to be a mixture of things? Because if it's going to be a mixture or more permanent, then maybe more collaboration tools. But one thing I ask people to think about is don't just rush into all these collaboration tools. Not that they're not great. It just, there's so many of them have been built and used, and many of them have been flocked to it. So it gets a little bit crowded. You got to think outside the box. Don't be like a herd mentality. I like to think. I'm always been a contrarian my entire career. So you gotta, people who makes a lot of money, not the herd thinker or the contrarian thinker. So I'll leave it at that as well. Thanks.
Awesome, David.
Okay, sure. So I believe RemoteTech has lots of different opportunities, but the infrastructure means the basic connections enable people to connect remotely. Will be the play field of large giant companies. Sorry, for small innovative companies, I believe, sorry, the innovation more come with particular special verticals. There are lots of different opportunities. I give you one example, like my formula I'm using, something which enable people to serve their client remotely, but with AI or software solution. Maybe the software already exists before pandemic, but because the pandemic, it become what we call the positive impact sector. So people cannot see, the client cannot see the company anymore. I give you two examples. Number one is mortgage. You'll be extremely surprised that, okay, now banks are reducing the number of refinance because they don't have enough staff on the bank, on the retailer, on the banks. So that's quite a significant needs of such software, which existed before, but nobody pay attention to. Big bank has resisted to such solution in the past. Another example I gave you before is called education. And of course, the third one is the chronic disease. All of them have similarity is because the pandemic, the company cannot see the patient or client anymore as regular as they were hoping before. So that software has to replace the current workflow to re-enable people to do it. The question how big the opportunity is a question that how easy for them to fall back the original solution. If there's no way to fall back, then it's an extremely high possible market. I give example, one possible market is the refinance market for mortgage, and education is similar. Once people used to use a software to engage with the client and found more effective to engage and cheaper. That's very important. Okay, cheaper for the banks or for the schools to run remotely. Then they're not going to come back, because coming back means that going back means that double or triple their budget. Once they use the current budget to serve the client. So I would say there's a big opportunities. But from investment perspective, I'm focusing on the sectors I'm familiar with in the health tech, food tech. I add a little bit of education and fintech there, but I do think the similar formula could apply to many other areas as well.
Absolutely. So guys, we are at the top of the hour. We're about to run over. So where can everyone find you? Alexis, Henry, and then we'll go around because everyone else has to jump. So Alexis, where can everyone find you online? And then real quick, Henry, where can everyone find you? Alexis.
So Alexis Graba on LinkedIn.com or on Facebook, no problem.
Wonderful. Henry, where can everyone find you online?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn, Henry on NGAN. My email is henry.h.ngan@gmail.com, which is also listed in my email. Thank you for having me again. And then
wonderful. Yeah, absolutely. Noble, where can everyone find you online?
LinkedIn, Noble Dracone, and on Twitter, just my last name, Dracone.
His Twitter's on fire. Definitely check it out. David, where can everyone find you online?
Okay, just find my name plus F50. You find me on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is my primary engagement tools, and also find me on YouTube as well. David Cao F50.
Wonderful. Tarun, where can everyone find you online?
So my universal handle is T Sakani. Twitter, LinkedIn, yeah, it's T
Easy.
Sakani. So tsakani.com, whatever. Yeah, that's me.
Easy peasy. He's all available 24/7, 365 remotely. Mahila, where can everyone find you quickly?
theimpactinstitute.org. In one word, theimpactinstitute.org, or use LinkedIn with my name. You will definitely find me.
Yeah, she's super active on LinkedIn. You can see, trust me, within about 2 seconds. But anyways, all of you, thank you so much for joining us today and joining us in our very new stage, virtual or physical, nonetheless, a new staged environment as we do here things remotely so often. And to your audience,
much more like to be in person and shake your hands and indeed do this in person. I'm all for, what our colleagues said here.
Absolutely. And someday soon, we'll be back there. If not, we'll be in the metaverse, thanks to Noble and all of his efforts with the team. But nonetheless, audience, thank you so much for tuning in today. If you like what you heard, click subscribe, give us a thumbs up. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any feedback, you'd like to see new episodes or new technologies talked about as well. Also, if you'd like to be on the show, investors, reach out. We've got a seat for you. Entrepreneurs, thank you, Tarun. Guess what? We've got a seat for you as well, but this time it's on the stage. You get the chance to get up in front of us, pitch us and the live audience as well. So do reach out to myself, Elena, or to the entire LA Token team, and we'd love to have you. To our guests, thank you again so much for joining us on the panel today. I'm looking forward to having each and every one of you back. And a big shout out to Elena and to the entire LA Token team. And thank you for making VCTV possible. I'm Kyle Ellicott, your host. You can find me online everywhere at Kyle Ellicott, and we'll be back here just shortly in a few minutes with another episode of VCTV talking about this subject and continue on, but we're diving into social networks this time. We're going to talk a little bit about where things are when it comes to social, whether that be centralized, decentralized, maybe somewhere else. Everybody, have a